Let's talk about the New King James Version of the Bible. I'm holding one of the most luxurious copies of God's Word that I have in my library. I'm holding the Schuyler Quintel New King James Version in deep purple with blue under silver art gilt and 3 purple ribbons. It's my preaching Bible when I preach from the New King James Version. I love the New King James Version. It's definitely one of my favorites. So let's talk about what makes the New King James Version unique. The New King James Version was developed in the 1970s when the president of Thomas Nelson Publishers felt like there needed to be a newer translation that really stuck to let me just give you a little bit of a history behind this translation. After struggling with the archaic and obsolete vocabulary and phrasing in the King James Version, young Joe Moore asked his father, president of Thomas Nelson, "Daddy, you make so many Bibles. Why can't you make a Bible that I can understand?" And that question was the genesis of the NKJV. I'm quoting from the book, The New King James Version in the Great Tradition by Arthur Farstad. One of the things I love about the New King James is that there is this book. There are not too many translations in which the primary editor, the overseeing editor of that translation, writes an entire book explaining the process by which they translated this translation. The New King James was originally intended to be an update of the King James Version by removing the words that had no longer the same meaning as they do in our language today. For example, the word conversation used in the New Testament refers to your entire lifestyle, not just to your verbal communication. And so that's a word that needs to be updated to a word that's more appropriate for today. And there's a lot of words like that, and I would encourage you, if you haven't already done this, to, on YouTube, go look at the work of Mark Ward about false friends. These are words in the King James Bible that don't mean today what they meant back then. And so you need to update these words. You need to take out some of the obsolete words that we don't even know at all what they mean, replace them with words we use today, etc. And so they put together a stellar translation team, competent scholars, including my New Testament professor, Dr. Curtis Vaughn, who was actually one of the oversight committee members. He's in the back of this book here. I'll give you the exact title of his role. I had Dr. Vaughn for both my New Testament courses, New Testament 1 and 2, in seminary. Godly man and wonderful Christian, excellent teacher. Dr. Vaughn was a member of the New Testament Executive Review Committee, along with 6 other scholars, including Dr. Farstad, who was the chairman. And I can even recall, I don't remember the details, I wish I had, and I could probably find some of these. I recorded so many of those lectures from Dr. Vaughn. On occasion, when we would be dealing with a text in our New Testament class, he would talk about discussions that was being conducted about that verse in regard to the New King James translation. So that was kind of neat. The New King James did not end up being just an updating of the words. It really came out as a new translation. In fact, some scholars would even say they were expecting the New King James, when it came out, to be just an update of words, but be the same as the King James Version. In actuality, it was significantly updated. And if you read the King James alongside the New King James, you'll see what I'm saying. Sometimes it sounds very much like the King James, and it's just a lot of the same words. Other times, it's significantly different. And Farstad explains a lot of those changes. I wish that every major English translation had a book like this, where you can, and this is, by the way, out of print. I think you can still get it on Kindle, and you can probably find a copy used somewhere like through abebooks.com. If you're a New King James fan, grab this. You're going to appreciate the New King James even more. Positives and negatives of the New King James. Positives are very reliable translation. Another positive, depending on your perspective of Greek manuscript families, if you are a fan of the Alexandrian family of texts, which are not the most numerical number of texts, we're talking about Greek manuscripts, but are the oldest, then you may struggle a little bit with the New King James being based upon the same textual family, the Byzantine family, as the King James. And some of you are aware that there are words in the King James and New King James that are omitted in the NIV, NLT, ESV, etc. And each translation handles that a little bit differently. The New King James mirrors the King James in staying with the Byzantine and the older accepted family of texts, which is not necessarily the oldest text, but the majority of New Testament manuscript text. And so that's why John 8 is considered authentic in the New King James, and the last half of Mark chapter 16 is also considered authentic in the New King James as it is in the King James, not to mention several other verses, whether it be this comes out by prayer and fasting, That's in the New King James. You can look up what verses and passages are different between those textual families. It's worth your time. But here is perhaps one of the greatest strengths of the New King James. The New King James goes to great lengths to let you know the manuscript differences in the footnotes. If you are interested in textual criticism and what manuscripts were used for different translation choices, no translation does a better job of giving you a system to understand the choices that are made and what the other options are down in the footnotes. As you can see, an example would be right here. So it shows you the other options, whereas most translations don't really do that as much. That's a real strength of the New King James if you're into that level of study. Another strength of the New King James to me is it's very lyrical like the King James, so it sounds a lot like the King James, and some love the beauty of that. Another strength is it has not been updated a lot. Some would consider that a weakness. I consider that a strength. I like a more fixed text, and the New King James has stayed the same for a long time, whereas some of these translations, including the ESV, changes, they'll make updates and make a lot of changes every once in a while. It kind of drives me crazy. Well, I got to get the latest version of that. Or if you're preaching from that, or teaching from that, you'll be reading text and someone will go, that's not what my ESV says when it comes to a verse or a phrase or word or something like that. The New King James is the same text. They've only updated, I believe, one time. What are the weaknesses? One of the weaknesses of the New King James, if you would call it a weakness, is it can be a little choppy at times. It can be a little awkward in terms of the flow. It doesn't flow as well as the NIV or as well as the New Living Translation, which is to be expected because it is a word-for-word formal translation as opposed to functional thought-for-thought translation. It's not going to flow as smoothly either as the CSB, which is a little bit more toward the thought-for-thought on the continuum, but it depends on what you're looking for in a Bible. If you're wanting a faithful word-to-word modern translation, I recommend the New King James as the number one choice. Similar to the King James, but updated language, very faithful, very reliable. Great translation.